I was at the bridal shop for my final fitting. In half a month, I would marry Jason. Although the wedding dress was custom-made, it was a bit tight around the chest and waist. When I went to the fitting room to adjust it, I suddenly heard voices outside growing clearer. Hey, did you know? Jason's ex-girlfriend, Jane, just got divorced and returned to the country. I remember when she broke up with Jason 3 years ago. He was so heartbroken. Yeah, if it weren't for Mary suddenly showing up and helping him through that dark time, he probably wouldn't have made it out. Who's Mary? The most rebellious little princess in the inner circle of Washington. Who would have thought she'd actually settle down for Jason? But now that Jane's suddenly back, do you think the wedding will still happen? They've already sent out the invitations. If it doesn't happen, wouldn't it be the joke of the town? When their voices faded, I took off the ill-fitting wedding dress and called Jason. He didn't answer, but amidst the noise on the other end, I heard his voice. Blind imitation. Mary doesn't even compare to Jane, not in the slightest. Someone chimed in. Come on. Mary was once the most unattainable and wild. Bro, be content. Jason sneered. Unattainable? For 3 years, she's been circling me like a dog. But damn it, she finally managed to get me to marry her. Bro, you don't like her? Jason's voice turned cold. Would you like a dog? Someone else asked. Then why are you marrying her? The air fell silent. After a long pause, Jason said, she used to be so wild, but now that she's tamed, she's fun to play with. I hung up the phone, looking at myself in the mirror, straight black hair and the tattoos on my arms and collarbone that I had already washed away. I suddenly laughed. This obedient girl, I've had enough of pretending. Jason didn't come home for a whole week. I listed our wedding home on the real estate platform. Every brick and tile here I bought. I didn't want any of it anymore. After finishing everything, I finally received his call to meet up. It was an event he organized, but he was the last to arrive. When he came in, he was holding Jane's hand tightly, as if afraid someone might harm her. He was making quite the show of protecting her. The room fell silent instantly. No one dared to speak, their eyes turning to me. I said nothing, just looked down at the red thread on my wrist, worn thin. I tugged at the corners of my lips. Jason brought Jane in front of me. Mary, I'm calling off the wedding. I raised my eyes, calm as ever. You're calling off the wedding? He held Jane closer, looking at her with adoration. Jane's back. I don't want to settle. No matter how much you try, you'll never compare to her. Don't you get it? I don't love you. I nodded. All right. He seemed shocked, as if he hadn't expected such a calm response from me. You know our marriage was arranged by our parents, he continued. I've loved Jane for 5 years and waited for her for 3. She's been through so much, and I want to give her a home. I grew impatient, grabbing my bag. Okay, are you done? Jason hesitated, silent for a moment before saying, I'll handle my side of things. You deal with yours. The wedding next week is off. All right. I stood up and headed for the door. When I reached it, Jason called after me. Mary? I turned around. He was still standing there, but I noticed his hand hanging by his side was clenched tightly. Anything else? He frowned. Don't you have anything to say to me? I thought for a moment. Honestly, I wanted to say, I envy you so much. Your first love came back, but mine never will. But in the end, I just said softly, Congratulations on your wedding. As I closed the door, I heard voices behind me. No way? That's Mary's reaction? Didn't you say she was madly in love with you, Jason? Why didn't she make a scene? Shut up, Jason snapped angrily. I didn't look back. I should have realized long ago Jason was nothing like him. He would never have turned his back on me for someone else. Outside, I walked into a barbershop. I cut off the long hair I had kept for 3 years. When a sharp blue pixie cut appeared, I felt like I was returning to myself. On my wrist, I tattooed a new phrase, Je ne recule jamais, French for I never retreat. Finally, I went to a place I hadn't stepped into for 3 years. Quinn, bring out my bike. A shirtless, muscular man stepped out of the shop. He looked at me, startled, his eyes reddening. After a long moment, he finally stammered, "Ma RY?" "Yes, it's me." The towering man, over 6 feet tall, glanced me up and down, stumbling over his words. "Mary, you're here?" I looked at the two bikes displayed in the most prominent spot. One black, one white. I smiled. "Still here, huh?" "Mary, I've been wiping them down every day. They're as good as new. You can ride anytime. Want me to call the guys?" I shook my head. "Just bring it out. I want to ride alone for a while." "All right." When I got on the bike, a long-lost feeling swept over me. I hadn't ridden in such a long time. It felt as though if I stayed away from my bike, I could forget what happened that summer. I turned to glance at the other black Kawasaki and thought of him. Quinn followed my gaze, his eyes reddening. "I've been waiting for Will, too. I kept his bike here untouched, right beside yours, thinking that someday they'd both be back on the road together." "Mary, it's been 3 years. I waited for you. Do you think he'll come back, too?" I was slightly stunned. It had already been 3 years. They say if you listen to the clock that turns back 1,000 times, you'll meet the one you want to see. I've already finished, but why hasn't Will returned? I turned away, a sting of bitterness rising in my nose, but I still comforted him softly. "That's just a lie. The dead don't come back to life." Then I started the bike. Quinn didn't know. I had already listened 10,000 times. I sped all the way to the mountaintop. Looking down at the view, I shouted into the night, "Will, I did what you said. I tried to marry properly. Why haven't you come back?" Tears rolled down my cheeks. "You liar. You promised to see me in a wedding dress. Look, my wedding dress, in the end, is still for you alone to see. But it doesn't fit. I've been eating well, living well, being good. Why doesn't it fit? Can you hug me? The wind is so strong. I'm so tired." On the empty mountaintop was an endless sea of stars. The moon cast its gentle light across the earth, making everything soft and tender. Behind me, there was a faint rustling sound. I spun around abruptly, but there was no one there. It was just the chirping of insects. Composing myself, I rode back down the mountain. But suddenly, I noticed that the black Kawasaki was gone. "Quinn." I rushed off my bike and called toward the shop. "Where's the bike? Who took it?" Behind me, a horn honked. My heart pounded faster than ever. For some reason, tears had already spilled over. I clutched my chest, slowly turning around. Under the dim yellow streetlight, Will leaned against the bike, dressed in black, his wild and unruly demeanor just as vivid as before. He raised an eyebrow at me. "My little firecracker, still such a crybaby, huh?" Time seemed to rewind to the first time we met. My parents had fought over my defiance and beaten me harshly. All I did was tell them to stop tormenting each other and get divorced. How was that wrong? I ran away and cried alone. Midway through, I heard a lazy, teasing voice. "Who's this little firecracker, crying here by herself?" Will, hands behind his head, lazily sat up and moved to sit beside me, handing me a tissue. "Crying alone is too lonely. You don't know me, but I can be a quiet listener." We were both 15 that year. I never told him why I was crying, but he stayed with me all afternoon. Later, I learned who he was, the school tyrant from the next high school. They said he was tough, ruthless, and a wild seed with no father. Perhaps it was fate. We grew closer. He took me to the mountaintop to see the stars, introduced me to his friends, and gave me the care I never felt at home. He told me to be true to myself. "Some people will like you just the way you are." Whenever I fought with my family, he was there to hold me gently and let me vent. He avenged me against those who talked badly about me, saying I wasn't a good girl. "Mary," he said, "no one can define right or wrong for you. No one can judge you. You are who you are." I defended him against those who called him a wild seed, and when he didn't want to speak, I stayed quietly by his side. "Will," I said, "you don't need to be anything specific. Your existence is already meaningful." People said he was cold and defiant, but only soft with me. Like two souls drifting in the deep sea, we became each other's lifeline. After high school, we fell in love. On the night we celebrated adulthood, he secretly took my hand and ran with me through the crowd. Will, does this feel like eloping? I asked. That summer had the fullest moon, the brightest stars, and the sweetest cicadas. Under the stars, we kissed and embraced. It felt eternal. Will, you're finally back. I missed you so much. My voice trembled, my body shaking slightly. Why are you crying? Come here, I'll hug you. I rushed forward, only to see Quinn pushing the bike toward me. Mary, why are you crying? Didn't Will say his bike and yours are inseparable? When you took yours, I decided to give his a quick ride too. Oh. It was just my imagination. I turned away, wiping my tears. They say you shouldn't meet someone too amazing when you're young, or everyone else afterward will pale in comparison. Maybe I was just too attached. Even after 3 years, I hadn't let go, still hoping for a miracle. Back home, everyone was waiting for me. Seeing my blue hair and biker outfit, my mom exploded with anger. Look at yourself. What kind of girl looks like that? No wonder Jason doesn't want you. Standing at the door, I suddenly didn't want to go inside. I turned to leave, but my dad stopped me. Where do you think you're going? Get in here. Call the Smiths and apologize. Tell them you'll only marry Jason. We've sent out the invitations. How can there be no wedding? And get rid of that hideous hair color. The Smiths don't like flashy women. Do you understand? I slowly walked up to them. I smiled. Why should I apologize? He's the one who wants to give his ex-girlfriend a home. He's the one who wants to call off the wedding. What's wrong with me letting him go? My father stood up and slapped me hard across the face. You fool. If he's lost his mind, can you afford to lose yours? Have you even thought about it? The Smith family would never allow a divorced woman into their home. My face burned with pain. He continued, even if he has another woman outside, so what? In this circle, who doesn't turn a blind eye? As long as it doesn't threaten your position as Mrs. Smith, what's there to be angry about? I gently touched my face and smirked. You two can live your separate lives while staying married, but sorry, I can't do that. My father's chest heaved with anger as he grabbed a cup from the table and hurled it at me. That bastard's dead. He's been gone for 3 years, and you're still wasting away like this. Are you going to mourn him for the rest of your life? Mary, I'll say it one more time. This wedding cannot be called off. Even if you die, it must be as Mrs. Smith. The cup grazed my face, leaving a cut near my brow. Suddenly, memories flooded back. After Will's accident during that race, I fell into severe depression. My wrists were covered in scars from self-harm. When the servants found me and saved me, my parents said I was just being dramatic, that a wealthy girl like me had no right to be depressed. They didn't understand me. They didn't care. They each had their own families outside of ours from when I was very young. I never understood why they bothered to have me if they didn't love each other. Until the company faced a crisis, and they wanted me to marry into the Smith family as a solution. I didn't want to, but they threw Jason's photo at me and told me to stop pretending. If I really didn't want to live, I should just die. I looked at the photo. For a moment, I thought Will had come back. He looked so much like him, especially those eyes. It was like a drowning person grabbing onto a lifeline. I agreed to meet him. I even dyed my hair black because they said the Smith family didn't like flashy women. I just wanted to stay by his side, to look at that face and feel content. I never expected Jason to take the initiative and leave me his contact information. He made the first move, and so we ended up together. Later, I realized he also saw me as a substitute. We were simply using each other. That's why, when he asked me to grow out my hair, I did. When he said he liked me in plain white dresses, I wore them. When he said he didn't like me smoking, I quit. When he told me to stop riding bikes, I listened. To others, it seemed like I had tamed my rebellious side for him, that I loved him to death. Even Jason thought so. But what could I do? Without that face, I wouldn't have had the courage to keep living. So, even when he pushed my boundaries time and time again, I accepted it. Because every time I saw him, I felt like Will was still by my side, never gone. until his white moonlight came back, and his eyes were full of someone else. That's when I finally woke up from the dream. No matter how alike they looked, Jason would never be him. Before bed, I unexpectedly received a call from Jason. My parents got a call from yours. I remembered the photo I had posted on social media earlier that day, a rare picture of me with my bike, the first in 3 years. A friend had commented, "So cool." Shortly after, Jason had commented under it, "Who would like such a flashy woman? Definitely not marriage material." So I cut him off. Don't worry. This wedding isn't just something you don't want anymore. I couldn't help but feel a little regretful, though. I'd never again see those affectionate eyes looking at me. Jason fell silent. After a moment, he laughed cruelly. "Mary, if you can put up with Jane, I might consider marrying you. But don't expect me to love you. Understand? We're just playing along for the parents' sake. You love me, and your family needs mine. I can help you fulfill your dream." I touched the string of English letters on my wrist and smiled slowly. "Jason, does Jane know you'd still marry me?" He didn't respond, but his breathing grew heavier. "Jason, I know you see me as Jane's substitute. Funny enough, I see you as a substitute too. Do you know when you resemble him the most?" I smiled, thinking of Will's carefree grin. "It's when you're silent, just looking at me. Even if you're just looking through me to see someone else, I'm not sad at all. Just seeing that face made me happy." I softened my tone and said lightly, "So, even though you made me do so many things I didn't want to do, I could never really be angry with you. But like you said, no matter how much I try, I'll never be her. And no matter how much you look like him, you're not him. So, being substitutes for each other, I don't owe you anything, and I don't love you. This wedding, it's off." Before I could finish, Jason hung up abruptly. I took 2 Estazalam tablets. Only in dreams could I see Will again, back in the 4 years we loved each other most. After the college entrance exams, we openly got together in front of all our friends. Do you know what it's like? To walk hand in hand with the one you love, drinking milk tea, watching a movie. Even in silence, just looking at each other makes the air feel sweet. We could finally ride our bikes together, racing through the world. Quinn once said, "Will and Mary are the most perfect couple I've ever seen." Just standing there, they're like a drama scene. I praised him for his words, and Will just stood casually by his bike, hands in his pockets, watching me banter with his friends. When we got into the same university, we formed a biking team and started entering competitions. Honestly, his looks attracted a lot of attention. Girls confessed to him all the time, even slipping him love letters after class. Afraid I'd get jealous, he bribed the campus radio station to read out love letters he wrote to me every day. It made my skin crawl, but he'd just hug me tight and laugh. "I'll never get tired of writing them. I'll write you one every day forever." People said neither of us seemed like the type for long-term relationships, but we proved them wrong. We were together for 4 years. Then my parents found out about us and demanded I come home. They were furious. They told me to break up with that bastard. I refused. My father raised a stick to hit me. I lifted my chin stubbornly. "You both have your own families and have ignored me for years. What right do you have to interfere in my life now? I'm so sick of your hypocrisy. What am I to you? A tool? A commodity? I'm your father. I gave you life, and you'll never escape the fate of bearing the surname Moore." My mother chimed in, "I've spoiled you too much. That's why you're so arrogant to say such things. Was it that bastard who taught you this?" When the stick was about to hit me, Will appeared and stopped it. He pulled me up and shielded me behind him. "For years, you never cared for her. She never received love from you, but now you expect her to repay you with kindness? On what grounds? Why should she blindly obey you? This is the girl I love most. If you don't love her, I do. If you don't want her, I do." That day, he took my hand and led me out of that house. We didn't say a word, but he held me the entire night. We promised to marry after graduation. But nearing graduation, I started being followed for no apparent reason. Sometimes, Flower pots fell from above as I walked down the street. Will became visibly distracted. One day, he suddenly asked me, "What would you do if I weren't here anymore?" "I'd follow you." I wasn't joking. Before I met him, I had no family, no friends, and no sense of purpose in life. He was my salvation. I couldn't imagine how I'd go on without Will.
"Don't," he sighed.
Even if I'm not around, you have to live well. Find someone who loves you, get married, and have children. Promise me, okay? I tightened my arms around his waist. What nonsense are you saying? In this lifetime, the only person I'll marry is you. Don't be willful. I'm serious. Why are you being serious? Tell me, are you hiding something from me? He cleared his throat and gently stroked my hair. My princess, how could I dare? You better not dare, or I'll marry someone else just to make you regret it. It was an empty threat. He chuckled softly. If you ever get married and I'm not the groom, I'll crash the wedding. Will said he wanted to win a race for me, use the trophy and a ring, and propose to me in front of everyone with the most passionate declaration. But he never came back from that race. The dream shifted to a misty forest. I could only remember the deafening cheers, the blazing summer heat, and the news on the big screen that he had fallen off a cliff. Amid the flames, there was no sound anymore.
"Will."
I woke up with my back drenched in sweat.
My phone rang.
It was Quinn. "Mary, there's a race on the mountain road this afternoon. Everyone's going. Are you coming?" "I'll come." It wasn't my turf, but I figured it was time to move forward. This one's a small race. There's an international one the day after tomorrow.
"Want to join?"
The others are already headed there. Leaning against my bike, I lit a cigarette. Sure, I need to practice. I'll race. They say some famous racers will be there. One's a foreign dark horse, and he's been amazing. But no one knows what he looks like. He never takes off his helmet. If I see him, I'll ask for an autograph. I exhaled smoke and teased him. How ambitious. Next time, I'll win a trophy for you. Quinn's eyes reddened again. "Mary, seeing you like this makes me so happy." I patted his shoulder. As I finished my cigarette, I noticed Jason nearby. Our eyes met, and I could see the spark in his gaze. "Mary?" I didn't intend to acknowledge him and crushed the cigarette underfoot. But he grabbed my wrist. "Let's talk." He stood in front of me, blocking the sun. Backlit, he was just a shadow. I looked at him silently, at the face so similar to Will's. What a pity, it wasn't him. "Don't look at me like that." Jason suddenly raised his voice. "Mary, how dare you lie to me?" He seemed furious, but I couldn't understand what he was angry about. I pulled my wrist free and said calmly, "Jason, shouldn't you be happy?" Jason's brows furrowed deeply, and he blocked me again, speaking through gritted teeth. "Happy? You made me a stand-in, and I'm supposed to be happy? Mary, do you even have a conscience?" Anger clouded his eyes. "No wonder you always looked at me like you'd lost and found something precious. No wonder you stared at me, teary-eyed so often. I really thought you loved me. I even agreed to the family's marriage alliance, thinking it was for you. What an idiot I was." I listened quietly before speaking. "Jason, weren't you using me as a stand-in too? Your white moonlight is back. You don't have to settle for me anymore." The stand-in game was over. He stepped closer, and I felt he might crush my shoulders in the next moment, so I instinctively stepped back. "Even if I was just a stand-in, didn't you change for me? Would you change for him?" After a pause, I answered seriously, "No, it wasn't for him. It was just that if I ever got married, I hoped Will would keep his promise and come crash the wedding. It was the last bit of hope I had left." "You never liked me?" I looked at him calmly. "You didn't like me, and I didn't like you. Isn't that fair?" He hesitated, his brows knitting tightly. "Of course it's not fair. Mary, you're nothing but a dog by my side. There are 6 days until the wedding. You'll regret this." "I won't," I replied. I packed my bags and boarded a plane to El City. There were still 4 days left until the wedding. My parents refused to cancel it, holding on to a shred of hope that Jason and I would reconcile. I touched the red string on my wrist that I had worn for 7 years. I made up my mind. After the race, I would cut ties with the family I no longer felt connected to. I finally understood some parents just don't love their children. And I made peace with myself. Quinn picked me up at the hotel. I heard that dark horse racer is staying here too. Maybe you'll run into him, he said. I smiled. Are you his little fanboy? Quinn scratched his head. I just think some of his techniques remind me a lot of Will's. My chest tightened slightly. Quinn quickly changed the subject. Mary, I'll take you inside. The guys are all looking forward to seeing you. They'll be thrilled you came to watch them race. We planned to head to the track just before the race started. At the venue, I saw many familiar faces. These were people who had followed Will in the past. They came from rough backgrounds, but Will had pulled them out of the abyss and given them a purpose to pursue. There, black racing suit, black bike, Quinn said, pointing at someone. The figure was too far away for me to make out clearly. But as if by coincidence, the person in the helmet turned their head slightly. A strange feeling gripped me. My hands started trembling, and my heart raced like it was about to leap out of my throat. The race has started, Mary, Quinn shouted. The black racer was the first to dash out. He raced like he didn't care for his life, charging ahead with relentless determination. I suddenly remembered what Will had said to me before his last race 3 years ago. He promised to win the championship trophy and proposed to me with it. I stared at the dark figure speeding across the track, my heart swelling with both pain and longing. I needed an answer. Whether it was him or not, I had to see the face beneath the helmet. I pulled Quinn and rushed to the podium. The minutes of waiting felt like an eternity, as if I were waiting for a ship at the airport, knowing it wouldn't come but refusing to give up. Finally, the big screen announced the winner. He had a foreign name. The camera panned to him as he placed 2 fingers on his lips and blew a kiss into the air. In that moment, it felt like that kiss landed right on my face, leaving me flushed. He followed the staff backstage. Through some connections I got in too. I walked up to him. I knew it was impolite, but I had to see him. I asked if he could take off his helmet. He didn't move, just stood there in front of me. Even his physique was eerily similar. My heart pounded uncontrollably. Finally, he spoke. Sorry.
Sorry.
That word chilled me to the core. So, it wasn't him. Memories of that summer flooded back, when Will had asked me what I would do if he were gone. I had said I would follow him, but I hadn't been able to. I lowered my head, my lips trembling, and turned to leave, finally letting go of my hopes. But suddenly, someone grabbed my wrist. I looked down, tracing my gaze from the defined knuckles to the veins on his wrist. There, he wore a red string, identical to mine, frayed and worn. In that moment, my mind went blank, but a tear fell onto his hand. I watched as he unfastened his helmet with one hand. And then, I saw the face I had dreamed of every day and night. Even the curve of his lips was exactly the same.
Will.
It was my Will. I missed you so much. But as I opened my mouth, no sound came out. I finally understood what it meant to be so overwhelmed with emotion that you lose your voice. 3 years had passed, and he seemed unchanged, just as I remembered him. Yet something had shifted. Why else would my vision blur so badly? Standing under the light, Will's silhouette seemed bathed in gold. He grinned, his eyes brimming with warmth. My little firecracker. What's wrong? Don't recognize me? I couldn't hold back anymore and threw myself into his arms, crying uncontrollably. Why did it take you so long to come back? I heard my little princess was getting married, and the groom wasn't me. Of course, I came back to crash the wedding. He held me close, kissing my hair. But I could hear the faint tremble in his voice, the hint of a sob. I clung to him, afraid to let go, tears streaming down my face. I was terrified that in the next moment, I'd wake up and find this was all just a dream, a hallucination. Even if it was, I prayed it would last just a little longer. I'm sorry. I promised to propose to you with a championship trophy, but I'm 3 years late. Do you blame me? I shook my head. No, I didn't. As long as you're back, I don't need anything else. That day, on the podium, Will gave me his trophy. And a long overdue ring. As I looked at him, I saw his present self merge with the boy from years ago. A promise delayed by 3 years finally reached its perfect conclusion. That night, we turned all our longing into action. Through sweat and tears, we claimed each other over and over. Even when we were utterly exhausted, we didn't want to stop. In his embrace, he finally told me everything that had happened over the years. It was absurdly dramatic. He and Jason looked so alike because they were brothers. Will's mother had been a wealthy heiress who fell in love with his father. But Jason's mother schemed her way in, drugging his father and getting pregnant to secure her position. Unable to tolerate the betrayal, Will's mother left, only to discover she was pregnant with Will. When Jason's mother found out about them, she secretly tried to suppress them. Eventually, Will's mother became consumed with thoughts of revenge. She forced Will to go abroad, take over his uncle's business, and retaliate against the Smith family. But Will had resisted because of me. So Will's mother targeted me. I suddenly recalled all those strange incidents of being followed and finally understood. Will had been terrified and begged her not to harm me. His mother, already consumed by obsession, gave him an ultimatum. She would leave me alone if Will left the city. Thus, the staged death was planned. Will was taken abroad. For 3 years, he barely slept, working tirelessly just to reunite with me sooner. His voice trembled as he spoke. "You have no idea how much I missed you." He recounted his story as if it belonged to someone else, how he had started from scratch to learn how to run a company, prove himself, and escape his mother's control. He couldn't contact me or see me because it was the only way to keep me safe. He told it all in just a few minutes. But I knew how difficult those years must have been for him. Standing before me now, I could only imagine how much it had taken to get here. I hugged him tightly, and he wrapped his arms around me, as if trying to meld me into his very being. Whenever I missed you so much that I thought I'd go mad, I would press the pen's tip into my wrist to remind myself to keep going, to succeed faster. I promised you I'd win a championship trophy for you and propose on the podium. I couldn't break my promise. I told myself that you were foolish enough to wait for me, so I had to hurry and succeed. And now, finally, I can stand in front of you. I knew. Tears dried and flowed again, releasing all the emotions that had been penned up for years. He gently stroked my face and pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. "My little firecracker, will you marry me?" With 3 days left until the wedding, I dragged Will to register our marriage. Looking at the official seal stamped between our photos, I laughed, and then cried. Will panicked, fumbling to wipe my tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I was late." I shook my head gently and wiped my face. "As long as it's you in the end, being late doesn't matter." Meanwhile, a photo suddenly started circulating in our social circle. It was taken at the race's finish line, showing a slender, pale hand pressed against the chest of the hottest racing champion of the moment. His tattooed, veiny arm was wrapped tightly around the woman's waist. The photo practically oozed hormones. No one knew who had leaked it, but everyone in the circle saw it. In a group chat, "That woman looks a lot like Mary, doesn't she?" "No way. Mary's the long-haired, demure dress type. How could she look like this, with short blue hair and a tank top? Actually, this kind of looks like how Mary used to look." "And the guy, doesn't he look like Jason?" "Holy crap, since when did Jason start racing?" "It's not Jason, looks like a foreign racer. Gotta admit, though, these two look great together. But didn't Jason say just yesterday, over drinks, that Mary would regret it before the wedding and come back to him?" "Well, Jason thought Mary couldn't live without him. Turns out, she just saw him as a stand-in. While I was trying on the wedding dress Will had custom-made for me and flown in, Jason called. 'Mary, who is he?' I was adjusting the hem of my gown when Will answered for me. Glancing at me, he smirked lazily and said, 'Hello, ex-boyfriend. Let me introduce myself. I'm her lawful husband.' Will and I gathered everyone at the mountain road. Riding our bikes, we raced together to the top, laughing and crying the whole way. Will held my hand tightly, as if we were back in that summer when we were 18. My little firecracker, wanna elope with me again? Tears filled my eyes. This time, I held his hand tightly and ran with him through the summer night. I stood on my tiptoes to kiss the corner of his lips, but he took control, gripping my waist and kissing me deeply. The familiar, soft, wild feelings couldn't compare to the joy of getting back what was lost. It made up for our tumultuous, fiery, romantic, and broken youth. I didn't know if we were each other's salvation. All I knew was that in every journey, love was the greatest truth. At Quinn's shop, we laughed and joked until almost dawn before falling asleep. When I woke up, everyone was sprawled out in corners. I loved the atmosphere. So warm and alive. I stepped outside to feel the mountain breeze and, unexpectedly, saw Jason. He was slumped beneath a utility pole, surrounded by cigarette butts and empty bottles. I had no idea how long he'd been there or why he was there. I didn't want to see him, but he stepped in front of me before I could leave. "Mary, let's get married," he said, pulling a household registration book from his jacket. I had no idea what game he was playing. Taking a step back, I raised my hand. "Jason, I'm already married." His eyes froze as he stared at the ring on my hand. "You married that racer?" I nodded. His anger flared. "How could you be so careless? You've known him for a few days. Why him and not me?" Halfway through his rant, he stopped, his tone softening as he looked at me. "I haven't canceled the wedding with my family yet. Let's go ahead with it in 2 days, okay?" I shook my head. "The wedding won't be canceled, but I've already replaced the groom." For a moment he froze. Then he laughed bitterly. "That racer, when he finds out you used him as a stand-in, he'll divorce you. Mary, stop being foolish. Marrying me is your best choice."
Oh.
Jason didn't know that Will had always been the one I loved. "Don't worry, we won't be getting a divorce." Will's voice came from behind, his arms wrapped. He was slumped beneath a utility pole, surrounded by cigarette butts and empty bottles. I had no idea how long he'd been there or why he was there. I didn't want to see him, but he stepped in front of me before I could leave. "Mary, let's get married," he said, pulling a household registration book from his jacket. I had no idea what game he was playing. Taking a step back, I raised my hand. "Jason, I'm already married." His eyes froze as he stared at the ring on my hand. "You married that racer?" I nodded. His anger flared. "How could you be so careless? You've known him for a few days. Why him and not me?" Halfway through his rant, he stopped, his tone softening as he looked at me. "I haven't canceled the wedding with my family yet. Let's go ahead with it in 2 days, okay?" I shook my head. "The wedding won't be canceled, but I've already replaced the groom." For a moment he froze. Then he laughed bitterly. "That racer, when he finds out you used him as a stand-in, he'll divorce you. Mary, stop being foolish. Marrying me is your best choice."
Oh.
Jason didn't know that Will had always been the one I loved. "Don't worry, we won't be getting a divorce." Will's voice came from behind, his arms wrapping around my shoulders. He planted a kiss on my lips and added, "Because those who betray end up in hell." Looking at Jason's face, so strikingly similar to Will's, he didn't say a word and left in a daze. 2 days before the wedding, Will and I were editing the guest list. We only wanted to invite our closest friends to a wedding that belonged entirely to us. We were busy to the point of exhaustion when an unexpected call came from Jane. On the other end, she was softly sobbing. "Could you visit Jason? He drank himself into alcohol poisoning and ended up in the hospital." I was puzzled. What did this have to do with me? Jane's voice cracked as she continued. "I always thought Jason truly waited for me, that he really loved me. I thought that once I came back, he'd firmly stand by my side. He spent that whole week with me, but he kept looking at his phone. I knew he was waiting for your call, but you didn't reach out even once. So he brought me to see you and said he wanted to call off the wedding just to provoke you. But when you left so calmly, he lost his mind. You don't know how crazy he was after you left. That's when I realized he had fallen for you in this game of being stand-ins. When he heard you were with someone else, he drank and kept muttering your name." I frowned and interrupted her. I don't want to hear this. I don't love him. Not even once. And he doesn't love me either. He just can't stand not having the upper hand in our relationship. I hung up. The day before the wedding, Will's company made a high-profile acquisition of the Smith family's business. That's when they discovered the Smith family had an illegitimate son, one who had no interest in claiming the inheritance, but instead joined forces with his mother to deliver a decisive blow. The public buzzed about how Will and Jason looked so alike. At the same time, Will announced he would marry his childhood love the next day. It was then that everyone realized the famous racer was him. He was my resurrected white moonlight. My parents were delighted, thinking they had latched onto a new golden opportunity. But that same day, I brought Will home and told them, Mary is cutting ties with the Moore family. I had hesitated for so long, letting the emotional toll wear me down, because they had given me life. I'd held on to the faint hope that they might care, understand, affirm, or love me. But coming into this world wasn't my choice. And now that I'm here, I'm an independent person. When their emotional indifference and my struggles with illness pushed me into the depths of despair, they stood by, watching me drown. Not once did they save me. So, if I can't have it, I don't need it. Not everyone is lucky enough to have familial love. Accepting the absence of certain feelings is part of growing up. As I left, my parents stood before me, their faces full of panic for the first time. But it had nothing to do with me anymore. On our wedding day, I wore the dress Will had custom-made for me. It fit perfectly. I asked him, "How did you know my size?" He pinched my cheek and replied, "Because some little troublemaker probably didn't eat properly while I was away." He was in a sharp suit, his wildness and defiance from youth replaced by a maturity and tenderness that melted my heart. He gently embraced me from behind. Looking at our reflection in the mirror, my eyes reddened. This day had been so long in coming. Will lifted my chin and kissed the corners of my eyes. "My little firecracker, still such a crybaby, huh?" With that one line, the tears I had been holding back flowed uncontrollably. That day at the foot of the mountain, I had imagined him saying this to me. But it had been just a hallucination. Now, that illusion had come true. I had lost him, and now he was back. Heaven had truly been kind to me. I tilted my head up and kissed the corners of his eyes in return. Because I know there's someone who will wipe my tears, who will wait with me through spring rains, summer breezes, autumn leaves, and winter snow. So even when I'm alone, I dare to move forward, because I know that at the end of the cliff, there will be wild winds and my love waiting there to tell me, "Hello, we meet again."